Hello, and welcome back to the Egg Crate Waffle Architecture tutorial, part 3 for the Digital Fabrication course. Where we left off in part 2 of the tutorial was showing all the different objects that we had created in order to get to our final curves. So the first thing I'm going to do is hide those objects. So now I just have my curves, and I can go back into the top viewport only, as this will make it a little easier for me to work around. So the next big thing that I need to ask myself is, what's the thickness of the material that these things are going to be cut out of? Even though this is a hypothetical tutorial in the fact that we're not actually cutting these things at the moment, it's still really important that I have that number because it's going to determine a lot of other parameters. So I'm going to go with 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to say that the material I'm cutting these shapes out of is 1/4 inch thick plywood. So taking that, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to work all of these axes and then all of these. So I'll zoom into these guys. I'll start with a line. And before I do that, I want to make sure I have all my object snaps on correctly. So right now I have end, midpoint, intersection, and perpendicular all selected. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go line, and I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to find the midpoint to this line. And then I'm going to click. I want to make sure I'm doing both sides. And what we'll do is we'll make this line 1/2 of 1/4 of an inch, right, which is 0.125. So 0.125, enter. It's really small, so I'm going to zoom in more, and I'm going to hold shift to keep it at 90 degrees. Enter. So now what I have is I have a line that's 1/4 of an inch thick at my midpoint. The next thing I'm going to do is do another line, and I can also just hit spacebar to repeat the last command. I'm going to select, and I'm going to go to the bottom. And this is really important because I want to make sure, no matter what I do, that all of the ones on this axis, I do the same way. And then when I go to do the other axis, I do them in the opposite way. So there I have that. I'm now going to do it to each one. And this takes a little bit of time, but it's not that hard. And again, I'm making sure to hold shift when I make my line to keep it nice and straight. There we go. And then I'm going to trim all of this out. So I can select everything, type in trim, and then go in, and I know I don't need this, that, this, that. Oops. There we go. There you have it. Oh, I missed one all the way down here. Trim. Good. So now, what I should be able to do is select the entirety of this shape, type in join, and look down the bottom left here. It said 21 curves joined into one closed curve and one open curve. So what I want is I want this whole thing to be closed. So what I don't know is where I have the open curve. So I'll do select open curves. And I don't know why, but I don't see it. So when I go over here, basic details, closed polycurve with 20 curve segments. So this is a closed curve, which is exactly what I want. So then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do it to the rest of these. And as you can see, I'm just doing the same thing, making sure I'm at the midpoint and that these are all perpendicular to that midpoint. Again, holding shift. Right, and then I'll trim. Go ahead and make sure I look, everything looks good. And then I'll join it. Again, one closed curve and one open curve. I'm not really sure where that open curve is coming from, but I do know that this, if I select this, I have a closed curve with 24 curve segments. So no matter what, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I'll select duplicates in case there's a duplicate curve. No duplicates. Okay. So I feel confident with that. And then what I'm going to do, I would then continue to do these next three shapes. And then I would move on to my other axis. And the important thing here is if you notice on our first axis, everything went from the midpoint down to the flat side. For these, everything's going to need to go from the midpoint up. Otherwise, it's the same process of line, midpoint, both sides, half of the thickness of my material, point, both sides, oops, wrong number, midpoint, both sides, 0.125, midpoint, both sides, 0.125, there we go. All right, now that I have all of my cross sections at the midpoint, at the distance, the thickness that my material is, now I'm going to go ahead and make all of my lines going up. Right, and this is the big difference between the last axes of shapes that we did and this axis, that we're going up to the top. And that's really important because when these things slot back together, this one will slide over the top one and they'll meet at the midpoint, and then the tops of these shapes will line up with each other again. So I'm going to go through, again, using my shift command to keep things nice and straight. Then I'll trim. I can do things like I can select all of those at once. Okay, done. So then I grab them all. Let me just look. Everything looks right. I'll join them. Closed curve with 24 curve segments. Awesome. So then I would continue and I would do it all to the rest of them, and then I would be done. And this thing would be now able to be outputted through a laser cutter, CNC plasma cutter, to create my waffle architecture. So, all right.